I've been pulling weeds by hand for years, until I found what they spent decades trying to hide from us. It was early morning, maybe 6 o'clock, the kind of morning where the dew is still sitting heavy on the grass and everything smells like earth and quiet. I was out in the backyard on my knees, again, working my way along the fence line, pulling dandelions and creeping Charlie out by the root the way I always had, the way my father did, the way his father did. Hands in the dirt, back bent, sweat already starting at the collar. I'd done this same ritual probably 100 times over the years, and every single time I'd told myself the same thing. Next season, it'll be better. Next season, I'll get ahead of it. But here's what I never asked myself, not once in all those years, was whether I was solving the problem or just managing it. Because those weeds came back, every time, without fail. Within a week or two, sometimes less, they were right back where I'd pulled them from, like they'd never been touched. And I'd kneel down again and start over. I lost count of how many hours I spent doing that. I stopped counting somewhere around year 12. That's probably the honest answer. The thing that changed everything wasn't something I read online. It wasn't a product I found at the hardware store. It happened when I was visiting an old farming community about 40 miles outside of where I grew up. The kind of place where the roads are unpaved and the gardens are the size of most people's backyards combined. I wasn't even there looking for anything in particular. I was there with a friend who knew somebody. And while we were walking along the edge of their property, I noticed something. The fence rows were clean. Not maintained looking clean, not recently weeded clean, completely clean. Bare soil running the length of that fence line with not a single weed breaking through. And I'm not talking about a 10-foot stretch. I'm talking the full length of the property, maybe 200 feet, maybe more. I stopped. I just stood there looking at it. And that was the moment I started asking questions. What I learned over the next few conversations, patient, unhurried conversations, the kind you only get in places where people aren't in a rush, was something so plain and so obvious that it almost made me angry. Not at them, at myself. At every dollar I'd ever spent on weed spray, at every hour I'd lost on my knees in the grass. The answer wasn't something developed in a lab. It wasn't patented. It wasn't on a shelf at any garden center. It was white distilled vinegar, standard household vinegar. The same thing sitting in most people's kitchen cabinets right now. But here's the thing, and this is the part the lawn care industry spent a very long time making sure you never quite figured out. It's not about the vinegar you know. It's about the vinegar you don't know, applied the way people who've been doing it for generations actually apply it. The version they sell you at the grocery store for $2 is 5% acetic acid. What these growers were using was 20%, horticultural grade. And the difference isn't just stronger. The difference is permanent. Here's the science, and I'll keep it plain because that's the only way I actually understand it myself. Acetic acid at high concentration doesn't just burn what it touches above the soil line. It penetrates. It pulls moisture out of plant cells at a rate the plant cannot recover from. When you hit a weed, root, crown, and all, with 20% acetic acid, you're not scorching the leaves like the kitchen stuff does. You're collapsing the cellular structure of the plant down to the root. The root desiccates. It can't regenerate. The plant doesn't come back in 2 weeks. In most cases, it doesn't come back at all. Now, I want to be straight with you here, because I'd rather you start with honest expectations than oversell it. Deep-rooted perennials, your established thistle, your old bindweed, might need a second application. But annual weeds, the stuff that's making your garden edges and your walkways look like a mess? One treatment. Done. The people I watched that morning weren't retreating those fence rows every season. They weren't treating them every year. A few of them told me they'd treated certain spots once 2 or 3 years back and hadn't touched them since. The method itself is so simple it almost feels wrong. You're going to want a garden sprayer, a basic pump sprayer, the 1-gallon kind, nothing special. Fill it with 20% horticultural vinegar. Add 1 tablespoon of dish soap per gallon. That's it. The dish soap acts as a surfactant. It helps the vinegar stick to the leaf surface instead of beading up and rolling off, which is a problem regular vinegar has, and which is exactly why the kitchen stuff feels like it works for a day and then stops. You apply it on a dry day. You want at least 2 days without rain in the forecast, ideally 3. You spray directly onto the weed, getting the base of the stem and the soil around the crown if you can reach it. You do this in the morning when the sun is coming up, not in the middle of the day and not in the evening. Morning application gives the acid time to work while temperatures are rising and the plant is starting its uptake cycle. By evening, the weed is already showing stress. By the next morning, most of them are brown. By day 3, they're finished. Now, here is something I didn't expect, and I want to make sure you know this going in. 20% acetic acid doesn't distinguish between a weed and anything else you pointed at. It will take out grass. It will take out ground cover. It will stress nearby ornamentals if you drench them. This is not a selective herbicide. It goes where you spray it, and it does its job completely. That's the trade-off for the permanence. So you use it on hardscape edges, you use it on gravel paths, on walkway cracks, on fence lines, on the perimeter of garden beds where you don't want anything growing. You don't broadcast spray it across your lawn and expect your lawn to be fine. That's not how this works, and anyone telling you otherwise is setting you up for a bad morning. Used correctly, targeted, deliberate, it's one of the most effective weed tools I've ever come across. Used carelessly, you'll be patching bare spots in your lawn for the rest of the summer. The tool is only as good as the hand that holds it. There are a few mistakes I see people make once they learn about this method, and I want to walk through them, because if you're anything like me, you'll make at least one of them the first time. The first is using grocery store vinegar and wondering why it didn't work. 5% acid will wilt a young annual weed on a hot day. It will not solve your problem. It will not reach the root. It'll give you the feeling of progress without giving you the result. Go get the horticultural grade. It's sold online, it's sold at farm supply stores, and no, it is not expensive. The second mistake is skipping the dish soap. I know it sounds unnecessary. It's not. Surface tension is a real thing, and without the surfactant, you're wasting product and effort. Third mistake, and this one stings because I made it myself, applying it on a cloudy day or right before it rained. The acid needs heat and time to work. Rain washes it off before it penetrates. A cloudy, cool day slows the process enough that you don't get full root damage. Conditions matter. The fourth mistake is expecting one application to handle everything in a heavily infested area. It will handle most of it, treat what survived after a week. 2 rounds on a bad area is not a failure. It's just finishing the job. Stick around because this last part is the piece I almost didn't include, and it's the reason that fence line looked the way it did after years without treatment. After the vinegar does its work and the weeds are brown and dead, there's a follow-up step that most people skip completely. Once the dead material is cleared, you apply a thin layer of corn gluten meal to the bare soil. Corn gluten meal is a pre-emergent. It doesn't kill existing plants, it prevents seeds from germinating before they can establish. It's been researched since the early 90s. It is entirely natural. It is the thing that closes the loop. The vinegar eliminates what's there. The corn gluten meal prevents what's coming. Together, those two things create a treated area that genuinely stays clear. That's the system. That's what I was looking at on that fence line. Not just a one-time treatment, but a 2-step method that works forward and backward at the same time, eliminating the current problem and cutting off the next one before it starts. The lawn care industry is a multi-billion-dollar business built almost entirely on repeat customers. Products designed to need reapplication, solutions that manage but never resolve. There is very little financial interest in telling you that 20% vinegar and corn gluten meal will do what years of product purchases couldn't. That's not a conspiracy, it's just business. The information isn't hidden exactly, it's just never loud. It lives in communities where people have been growing food and maintaining land for generations without a trip to the hardware store. It lives in old agricultural extension literature that nobody's marketing budget is promoting. It lives in the quiet observations of people who noticed that certain fence rows just stayed clean, year after year, and thought to ask why. I spent 12 years pulling weeds by hand before one morning walk along somebody else's fence line changed how I thought about all of it. If this saves you one season of that, then this was worth making. If you want the full sourcing on the horticultural vinegar and the corn gluten meal, the specific concentrations, the application rates, everything written out, I've put together a reference sheet that you can get through the link below. No cost, no sign-up required, just the information laid out clearly. And if you've already tried something like this, or if you've got a variation that worked on your property, I'd genuinely like to know about it. Drop it in the comments. The most useful things I've ever learned about land and growing came from people who figured something out in their own backyard and were willing to share it. That's the whole point of building a community around this kind of work. Not to follow one voice, but to collect what actually works and put it somewhere everyone can use it. See you in the next one.